And this is indeed an excerpt from And We All Grow Up Anyway, and it's about parenting advice 40 years ago and today. So, another debate that has come full circle is pick up or let scream. My mother was of the let scream school, an institution where I could never enroll. The sound of a howling baby goes through me like a drill, and I'll do anything, violence accepted, to make it stop. Sometimes violence seemed like a pretty good idea too, especially at 4 a.m. at the 5th wake-up call of the night. When Nate screamed, I picked him up. I rocked, I cuddled, I sang, I wore ruts in the hallway, walking back and forth with him on my shoulder. Letting him cry it out was not an option. The heck with his suffering, I couldn't bear it. But my mom was made of tougher stuff. My father had a story about my parents' sojourn in Panama. This is where my sister Hope was born, and my parents hired a housekeeper shortly after her birth. Marcella, the housekeeper, had made it clear to my mother that she would cook, clean, and do dishes, but she was not una niñera, a nanny. My mother replied that was fine, as she intended to take care of the baby herself. And so Marcella joined our family, and upon meeting baby Hope, drew one startled breath and fell madly in love. So she cooked, she cleaned, she did dishes, and any time Hope was not physically attached to my mother, she was in Marcella's arms. The climate in Panama is dense and tropical, so the floors in my parents' apartments were stone, much cooler than wood or carpet, and also completely silent when walked upon. On one particular night, my parents were having dinner. My mother was seated in her usual place with her back to the doorway. Hope, then an infant, was in her room sleeping, but then not sleeping. Presently, she began to cry. My mother calmly continued eating. My father began to twitch. Eventually, he said, "Don't you think we ought to go get her?" "No," replied my mother with the certainty of someone who has done the reading. "She needs to put herself to sleep." My mother went back to her soup. My father continued twitching. And in this he was not alone. In the doorway behind my mother appeared the stealthy figure of Marcella, walking noiselessly on the silent stone floors. Quickly she reached Hope's room, picked up the sobbing child, and walked back and forth with her. Instantly the crying stopped, and my oblivious mother beamed up at my father. "There," she exclaimed, "you see?" "Yes," replied my father, gazing at Marcella and Hope, "I see." My mother wasn't cruel. She was going on the best information of the day. And I suspect that in this regard she had it easier than today's mothers. My mother had Dr. Spock and the regime. By contrast, parents today are unendingly assailed by a cacophony of contradictory advice from well-credentialed experts who all assert with equal certainty that they are right and everyone else is wrong about our baby. Each book impugns the others and presents us with logical arguments, quasi-forensic examples of infants soothed, and legions of acolytes who chant unbroken testimonials to the baby wrangler of their choosing. We're told in equal measure to pick up the baby whenever it cries and to let the baby scream so it learns to self-soothe. We're told never, under any circumstances, to waken a sleeping baby, and then given a list of reasons to do just that. We're told to provide a still and silent sleep environment for the little bugger, and also to supply lots of white noise and movement to mimic the womb. One baby care test case is swaddling. Here it is very hard for me not to evangelize because the combination of swaddling, rocking, and blaring static seems to have been custom-tailored for both my children, and in particular my son. Nate, who is perhaps the world's sunniest toddler, did not start out that way. He was, in fact, a screamer. And his cries went on for hours with a particularly agonizing fingernails on chalkboard quality. I remember once he fell asleep in my arms, and I stayed in the same position for the next 2.5 hours rather than wake him. I didn't care if my arms turned black and necrotic from blood loss. My baby was asleep, and the clamor had stopped, and that was all I cared about. Eventually, of course, he woke up and started screaming again. A friend finally suggested a video about swaddling, and I watched it with no faith whatsoever. Time after time, the doctor in the video took babies who were shrieking like dentist drills and wrapped them tightly in a blanket before turning them on their sides. Instantly, the babies stopped. Bleary with fatigue, I decided these were not real babies, but animatronic stunt doubles. No real baby would shush that easily, and certainly not mine. As soon as the video was over, Nate gave a cry. Then he took a deep breath and gave another one, and another, each more piercing than the one before. Imagine 10 electric coyotes being ground up in a Cuisinart. Figuring I had nothing to lose, I grabbed a receiving blanket and swaddled him up tight as a jelly bean. Then, supporting his head with one hand, I turned him carefully onto his side, supporting him on my knee. He stopped. Well, I'll be damned, I thought. Thank you.